They built their empire on a gratitude tax. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the observation deck of the starship Vindication. Her reflection was a ghost against the impossible tapestry of the Cygnus X1 conclave. Ships like silver needles and organic coral-like barges hung suspended in the void. They were all held together by shimmering filaments of containment fields and legal doctrine. Below them, a world of sculpted obsidian and light served as the forum for 1,000 species. The stakes here were not worlds, but the laws that governed them. The Cathar Imperium claimed the developing Glypton race owed them a debt for their very existence. Rostova was here to argue that freedom had no price. The case would be heard not in a battle, but in a public inquiry where words were weapons and precedent was territory. Her reflection's eyes narrowed, mirroring the cold resolve in her own. The Cathar method was insidious, a slow corrosion of sovereignty dressed in the finery of benevolence. It was a poison offered in a gilded cup. Rostova's mission was to prove that the cup itself was the crime, not just its contents. She would need more than passion. She would need a scalpel sharp enough to sever a bond a century in the making. The conclave's public ledger, a stream of glowing script in the star-dusted dark, would record the outcome. It was the only witness that mattered. A Glypton artisan, her 4 delicate hands chapped from polishing star jewels, watched her child sleep. The tithe collector had come that morning. It took the finished gems meant to pay for the child's atmospheric filters. The collector had smiled a gesture of 1,000 serrated teeth. He had called it a gratitude payment, a small price for the Cathar's wisdom in guiding her people. She now had to choose between medicine and her child breathing for another cycle. Her heart beat a rhythm of quiet, desperate anger against the cage of her ribs. Tactical Officer Kenji Tanaka shimmered into existence at the edge of the observation deck. "Commander," he said, his voice a low burr of controlled energy. "The Cathar delegation has just filed a pre-inquiry motion. They claim our presence here is an act of unlawful coercion." Rostova did not turn. Her focus remained on the swirling ballet of ships outside. "Unlawful how, Kenji?" she asked, her tone even. Tanaka's projection flickered with suppressed irritation. "They're citing Concordat Article 7, Section Gamma, the one about sovereign debt mediation. They argue we have no standing. Humanity had a standing everywhere." Rostova finally faced him, her expression unreadable. "They are framing a shakedown as a loan. It's a clever, disgusting strategy." She began to pace the magnetic soles of her boots, making soft, rhythmic clicks on the deck plating. "They want to drown us in procedure before we ever get to the substance." Kenji's fists were clenched at his sides. "We have 3 destroyer-class escorts, Commander. A show of force would grant us standing." Rostova shook her head. "And prove their point." "No. We will win this by their rules. We will make their own system teach them the lesson." The ship's AI palace spoke its voice, a calm, synthesized resonance in the air around them. "Commander Legal Officer Sharma requests your presence. She has analyzed the Cathar's legal framework. Her preliminary assessment is pessimistic." Rostova's pacing stopped. She gave Tanaka a sharp, decisive nod. "Kenji, have our escorts assume a standard honor guard formation. No deviations. Palace on screen. Anya, report." The face of a young woman, sharp and intelligent, but shadowed with worry, replaced Tanaka's projection. The fight was already beginning, not with weapons, but with words designed to exhaust and entangle. Anya Sharma's face was pale, the light from her data slate reflecting in her wide eyes. "Commander, their legal architecture is flawless. The gratitude tithe is structured as a voluntary development pact. The Glyptons signed it 3 generations ago. Rostova's eyes narrowed. Signed it under what conditions, Anya? The young officer swallowed hard. The Cathar arrived when the Glyptons were suffering from a planetary atmospheric collapse. They provided the technology to stabilize it. The pact was the price. It was a rescue that had put a collar on a species. So they saved a life and sent a bill for the air, Rostova murmured, her voice dangerously soft. The Concordat doesn't have laws against predatory benevolence. Pallas interjected, its tone devoid of emotion. The term is logically inconsistent, Commander. An action cannot be both predatory and benevolent. Rostova's lips thinned into a hard line. The Cathar have found a way, Pallas. They have monetized morality. Anya, what about the coercion statutes? Sharma shook her head, strands of dark hair falling across her forehead. The records show the Glypton elders of the time agreed. There's no proof of threat. Their cage was built of ink and Dobrovolny agreement. Rostova turned back to the star-dusted view. The conclave glittered with ancient, untouchable power. It was a place of rules, not of justice. She had to find a way to make them the same thing. Then we do not challenge the pact itself. Rostova declared a new and dangerous idea taking root. We challenge its execution, its accounting. Kenji, who had remained silent, stepped forward. Commander, what are you planning? Rostova's reflection offered a cold, feral smile. The Cathar are very proud of their numbers. We're going to give them a full and public audit. The Cathar ambassador, a being called Exthar Klee, moved like a raptor made of obsidian shards. His chitinous body was draped in robes of woven light, and his multifaceted eyes registered everything with predatory stillness. He stood before the preliminary inquiry panel, his translator drone humming deferentially beside him. Humanity's presence here is an emotional outburst, Exthar Klee stated, his true voice a series of resonant clicks and whistles. They are a young race prone to sentiment. They see a child's debt and call it slavery. He made a gesture with one of his 3-jointed limbs. We see a sacred obligation. A universe that does not honor its debts descends into chaos. This was how they justified the chains. Rostova watched from the human delegation's gallery, her face a mask of calm. Every word the ambassador spoke was a carefully chosen legal brick. He was building his wall, and it was a strong one. The panel composed of 3 ancient beings whose forms defied easy description, listened without expression. We did not conquer the Glyptons, Exthar Klee continued, his voice resonating with sincerity. We uplifted them. We provided the tools of survival. In return, we ask for a tithe, a mere fraction of the prosperity our intervention created. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. It is a simple matter of gratitude. Anya Sharma, sitting beside Rostova, shifted uncomfortably. He's good, Commander. He is framing it as a partnership. Rostova gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod. He's not just good. He's right, according to their laws. Kenji, standing behind them like a statue, vibrated with contained frustration. Then their laws are wrong. Rostova's gaze never left the ambassador. Then we must show them why. Pallas, are you recording every syllable? Cross-reference his statements with the text of the original pact. The AI's voice was a whisper in her ear implant. Affirmative, Commander. I have already identified 3 points of semantic divergence. The inquiry, she was a game of inches, and the first move was a lie. The Cathar ambassador leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes fixing on the human delegation. The humans wish to audit our accounting. We welcome it. He radiated smug confidence. Our ledgers are immaculate. Every gram of material, every joule of energy, every unit of labor gifted to the Glyptons is recorded, and the corresponding tithe is calculated with unimpeachable precision. He then delivered the killing blow. To demonstrate our transparency, we have brought a beneficiary of our partnership. 2 Cathar guards escorted a Glypton elder onto the platform. Around the Glypton's neck was a collar of dull gray metal pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. The gallery murmured a wave of discomfort rippling through the assembled species. Rostova felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The collar was new. It hadn't been in any of the intelligence reports. It was an escalation, a deliberate and public statement of ownership. Kenji's breath hissed through his teeth. Anya looked physically ill. "What is that thing?" she whispered, horrified. The ambassador's translator drone answered, its tone bright and helpful. "This is a gratitude collar, a device to help our Glypton partners manage their obligations. It monitors their economic output and automatically remits the tithe. It is a tool of convenience." They had branded a living being with a receipt. Rostova rose to her feet. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring with chilling precision. "Ambassador X Tharkli," she said. Her eyes locked on the collar. "Under the rules of this public inquiry, I request you explain the full functionality of that device for the public ledger." The Cathar's head tilted, a gesture of avian curiosity. He had wanted to shock them to show his power. He did not expect this cold, procedural demand. He had just handed Rostova the very weapon she needed: the law. The ambassador could not refuse a direct procedural request. His arrogance had become a leash. "Of course, Commander Rostova," he chirped, though the warmth was gone from his tone. "The collar is a marvel of compassionate engineering." He began to detail its functions, proud of the system his people had designed. He explained how it interfaced with the wearer's biology, tracking caloric intake, energy expenditure, and even neural activity related to productivity. It measured everything. It calculated the value of every action, from mining ore to composing music. A portion of that value was then instantly debited from the Glypton's public accounts. They had put a meter on the soul. Rostova listened, her expression unchanging, as the ambassador detailed the cold, brutal mathematics of the device. He spoke of efficiency and accuracy. He boasted that the collar eliminated the need for clumsy tax collectors. He was so lost in his own technical pride that he did not see the trap closing around him. He was not just describing a machine. He was describing a philosophy, and he was entering it piece by brutal piece into the permanent, unchangeable public record of the conclave. Anya was furiously taking notes, her initial horror replaced by a dawning, predatory excitement. Kenji's anger had subsided into a focused, watchful stillness. "The device also has motivational functions." Extharkli added, a hint of menace creeping back into his voice. "Should a Glypton's gratitude fall below expected levels, the collar can provide encouragement." He did not elaborate. He did not have to. The implication hung in the silent chamber. It was a tool of compliance, a shock collar for a civilization. Rostova let the silence stretch, letting the full weight of the ambassador's testimony sink into the minds of everyone present. He had just on the record admitted to a system of total biological and economic control enforced by the threat of pain. He had confessed to a crime he did not believe was a crime. "Thank you," Ambassador Rostova finally said, her voice like ice. "Your transparency is illuminating." She sat down. She had what she needed. The first phase of her plan was complete. The ambassador, sensing a shift in the room's atmosphere, faltered for a moment. He had expected outrage, a passionate human outburst that would make them look weak and emotional. He received only cold, quiet procedure. He had willingly laid the entire architecture of his monstrous system bare for all to see. He had handed his enemy the blueprints to his own fortress. He thought he had been giving a demonstration of power. He had actually been giving a deposition. In the corridors of light and shadow outside the inquiry chamber, Rostova gathered her team. He overplayed his hand, Anya said, her voice buzzing with energy. He admitted to everything. Duress, biological interference, punitive enforcement. We can use this. Rostova shook her head. No. Not yet. All he did was describe a system. A cruel one, but the Concordat has no laws against cruelty, only against breaking contracts. Kenji scowled. So we let them get away with it. We have his testimony. Justice delayed is not always justice denied. His testimony is not the weapon, Kenji Rostova explained patiently. It is the targeting data. Palace, have you completed your analysis? The AI's voice emanated from Rostova's comms unit. Affirmative, Commander. I have cross-referenced the ambassador's description of the collar's function with the Cathar's energy consumption records for the last 50 years. The discrepancies are significant. A new path was opening, a road paved not with moral arguments, but with cold, hard numbers. A mystery was beginning to unravel. The gratitude tithe was more than just extortion. The Cathar broadcast their edited version of the hearing that evening. It was a masterful piece of propaganda. Rostova's calm, procedural questions were framed as cold, inhuman indifference. The ambassador's speech was cut to emphasize his points about partnership and the sanctity of debt. The Glypton elder with the collar was presented as a happy volunteer, a pioneer in a new era of interspecies cooperation. The broadcast ended with an image of Rostova's face frozen in a moment of stern contemplation, with the caption, "Does humanity understand gratitude?" The narrative was clear. The Cathar were benevolent patrons, and the humans were callous meddlers. They were trying to win the war of opinion before the real battle began. A young human couple, colonists on a frontier world, watched the broadcast in their small habitation unit. The woman turned to her partner, her brow furrowed with concern. "Are we the bad guys?" she asked, her voice small. "That ambassador, he made it sound so reasonable." Her partner put his arm around her. "Eva Rostova is in charge of that ship," he said with quiet confidence. "She doesn't lose, and she doesn't fight for the wrong side." He had served under her during the Orion border disputes. He knew that her silence was more dangerous than another commander's threats. Aboard the Vindication, the mood was grim. The crew felt the sting of the public humiliation. Kenji's report was blunt. "Morale is taking a hit, Commander. The crew isn't used to being painted as villains. They want to hit back." Rostova stood before the main tactical display, which showed the flow of public sentiment data. The Cathar narrative was gaining traction. "We will hit back, Kenji," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But not with cannons, with arithmetic." She turned to face her officers. "Anya, I want every trade agreement, every energy transfer, every resource pact the Cathar have signed in the last 200 years. I want to see their entire balance sheet. They would fight an empire's books, not its battleships." Anya's eyes widened. "Commander, that's a galactic level of data." Rostova nodded. "And we have a galactic level AI to process it. Palace, you have your assignment." The AI's synthesized voice was immediate. "The task is underway. I project a 98.7% probability that the data will reveal systemic economic predation. The Cathar Imperium does not create wealth, it only harvests it. Rostova looked at Kenji. That is the story we are going to tell, Kenji. Not with a counter-broadcast, but with a formal charge submitted to the Conclave's adjudicators. We are no longer just challenging the Glypton Pact. We are challenging the entire Cathar economic model. This was the first great escalation. The battlefield was expanding from a single world to an entire empire's way of life. The Cathar had wanted to make this about one contract. Rostova was making it about a pattern of behavior. It was a high-risk gamble. If she failed, she wouldn't just lose the case for the Glyptons. She would make a powerful permanent enemy for humanity. Kenji's expression shifted from frustration to a slow, dawning respect. He finally understood. Rostova wasn't playing defense. She was setting up a kill shot so precise no one would even see the trigger being pulled. The core of their doctrine was a lie wrapped in a ledger. How will we prove it? Anya asked the scale of the task, threatening to overwhelm her. Their records are sealed under sovereign immunity. Rostova's gaze was fixed on the tactical display, but she was seeing something else entirely. She was seeing a path through the labyrinth. We have the ambassador's sworn testimony. He boasted about his immaculate ledgers. He boasted about the caller's precision. She turned to Anya, a flicker of cold fire in her eyes. We are going to use his own words to demand a full system-wide mirror audit. We will ask the Conclave to compare the energy the Cathar claim to have gifted with the energy they have actually drawn from their client species. The plan was audacious. A mirror audit was an obscure, rarely used legal tool. It was designed to resolve disputes over shared energy grids or resource-rich nebulae. It had never been used to audit an entire civilization's economic history. It was a legal sledgehammer. If granted, it would give them access to every record, every transaction, every dirty little secret the Cathar had buried for centuries. The Cathar's confidence was their greatest weakness. They believed their own lies. They had built an empire on cooked books, and Rostova was about to call in the auditors. Palace spoke its voice, cutting through the tension in the briefing room. Commander, I have completed the preliminary analysis. My findings are conclusive. The main screen flickered, replaced by a complex flowing diagram of energy and resource transfers. Red lines representing tithed payments flowed from dozens of client worlds into the Cathar home system. Blue lines representing Cathar investments and aid were thin, almost invisible trickles. The imbalance was stark obscene. The Cathar Imperium is not a creditor, Palace stated. It is a parasite. The net energy transfer is overwhelmingly in their favor. The gratitude tithe is not a repayment. It is a harvest. They had built a throne of stolen futures. There was the proof. The pattern was undeniable. The Glyptons were not an isolated case. They were the latest victim in a long and profitable history of exploitation. Rostova felt a cold, clean anger solidify within her. It was the anger of a mathematician who has found a flaw in a beautiful equation. The Cathar's empire was built on a lie, and the universe had to know it. Anya Rostova commanded, her voice ringing with newfound authority. Draft the petition for a full-spectrum mirror audit. Cite Ambassador Xthar Klee's testimony as the primary justification. Kenji, prepare the ship for a potential backlash. They will not take this quietly. This ship teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. The petition landed like a meteor in the placid waters of the conclave. The Cathar were outraged. They accused humanity of a malicious, bad-faith legal attack. They filed counter-motions appeals and formal protests, but they could not escape the trap they had set for themselves. The ambassador's own words, his boasts of transparency and perfect accounting, were quoted back at him in Anya's ruthlessly precise legal brief. He had opened the door, and Rostova was now driving a warship through it. The conclave adjudicators, bound by their own ancient laws of procedure, had no choice. They granted the audit. The Cathar's legal confidence began to crack. Exthar Klee confronted Rostova in a neutral, high-ceilinged transit corridor, the air humming with the passage of silent transports. He dispensed with his translator drone, his clicks and whistles raw and angry. Pallas translated directly into Rostova's ear. "You abuse our traditions. You twist our laws into weapons." Rostova faced him, her hands clasped behind her back. She was a picture of serene composure. "I am using your laws exactly as they were written, Ambassador. You praised the accuracy of your accounting. We are merely verifying it." His mandibles clicked in agitation. "This is an unprecedented violation of our sovereignty. My people will not forget this insult. It is not an insult to ask a banker to count the money." Rostova replied, her voice even. "Unless the banker has something to hide." The ambassador recoiled as if struck. He had no answer for that. He had spent his entire career navigating a system of unspoken rules and veiled threats. He was unprepared for this blunt human logic. He was a predator who had just discovered that his prey could read his mind. He turned and stormed away, his robes of light flickering erratically. He knew with a certainty that chilled his alien blood that the game had changed. His empire's secrets were about to be laid bare. The cost of truth was a reckoning centuries in the making. Days turned into weeks as Pallas, granted unprecedented access by the conclave's authority, began its deep dive. The AI worked with a silent, relentless efficiency. It processed quintillions of data points. It mapped the flow of every resource from exotic heavy metals to simple atmospheric nitrogen. It created a perfect, unassailable mirror of the Cathar economy. Aboard the Vindication, the human crew waited. The public battle of narratives had gone quiet, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Everyone was waiting for the numbers. Kenji ran endless tactical simulations, preparing for the worst. Anya double-checked every legal precedent, preparing for the final confrontation. A Cathar data clerk, a low-level functionary on a forgotten mining outpost, received a query from his sector's central archive. It was a request for production logs from 150 years ago. He was a third-generation serf, his family bound by a debt his ancestors had incurred for the gift of mining technology. He had never questioned it. It was simply the way of the universe. Now an outside entity was asking questions. For the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of something other than resignation. He felt a sliver of hope. Rostova spent most of her time on the observation deck, watching the conclave. She was waiting for the other side to make a mistake. She knew the Cathar would not sit idly by while their empire was being dismantled by an algorithm. They would lash out. They had to. Their entire identity was built on a foundation of perceived superiority. To be subjected to an audit by a younger race was an intolerable humiliation. The only question was when and how they would react. She had put her ship and her crew in the path of a wounded, cornered animal. An empire built on lies cannot stand the light of an honest accounting. The alert came at 0300 ship time. Kenji's voice was sharp in the sudden quiet of her quarters. "Commander to the bridge! Now!" When Rostova arrived, the main screen showed 3 Cathar warships. They had broken formation from the main conclave fleet and were on a direct intercept course with the Vindication. They were not broadcasting any threats. They were not powering weapons. They were simply moving a clear and deliberate act of intimidation. "They're trying to force us to fire first." Kenji set his hand hovering over the tactical controls. "They want to turn this legal dispute into a military one." Rostova's eyes were fixed on the approaching ships. They were sleek, predatory vessels designed for shock and awe. Her own ship was a diplomatic dreadnought, heavily armed, but not built for a brawl. "Hold your position, Kenji," she ordered, her voice betraying no alarm. "Do not raise shields, do not power weapons. Hail them, standard non-threatening greeting." The Cathar ships continued their approach, ignoring the hail. They were going to play chicken with a human warship in the most public space in the galaxy. It was a desperate, foolish gambit. Their arrogance was the only weapon they had left. The lead Cathar ship grew larger and larger on the screen. It was going to pass within meters of the Vindication's bridge. The tension on the bridge was a physical thing. The crew held their breath. Rostova stood as still as stone. At the last possible second, the Cathar ship veered its sleek belly, scraping past the Vindication's view screen with a screech of protesting force fields. It was a bully's move, a final pathetic attempt to assert dominance. Kenji's knuckles were white. "Commander, I request permission to file a formal protest for unsafe maneuvering." Rostova allowed herself a small, cold smile. "Denied, Kenji. They've already given us something far better." She turned to her communications officer. "Get me the Conclave traffic control logs for the last 5 minutes, and send my compliments to the Cathar ambassador. Thank him for his directness." The Cathar had just committed their second unforced error. In their attempt to intimidate her, they had violated dozens of Conclave transit regulations. It was a petty minor infraction in the grand scheme of things. But in a legal battle this precise, it was a gift. It demonstrated a contempt for the very laws they claimed to venerate. It was a crack in their carefully constructed facade of civilized superiority. Rostova would add it to the growing mountain of evidence against them. They were bleeding credibility drop by drop. The beast was wounded, and now it was getting clumsy. Palace chose that moment to make its announcement. Commander, the AI's voice filled the bridge, calm and implacable. "The mirror audit is complete. I have the final numbers." Every head on the bridge turned towards the main screen. The complex diagrams of resource flow resolved into a single, simple image. It was a balance sheet. On one side was the total value of Cathar aid and investment in their client species over 3 centuries. On the other side was the total value of the tithes they had collected. The discrepancy was not just large, it was astronomical. The Cathar had not just been exploitative. They had been carrying out one of the largest and longest-running frauds in galactic history. The numbers did not lie. The ledger had told its tale. Rostova looked at the final damning figures. The Cathar hadn't just collected on their initial investment. They had collected it 1,000 times over. The Glyptons' debt for their atmosphere had been paid off in the first 5 years. For the next 95, they had been paying pure, unadulterated tribute. And they were just one of dozens of species caught in the same web. Pallas Rostova said, her voice quiet, but ringing with the certainty of victory. "Package the entire audit. Every data point, every calculation. Prepare it for public release." And Anya, she said, turning to her legal officer, who was staring at the screen with an expression of stunned awe. "Draft the final charge. We are no longer alleging predatory lending. We are alleging systemic species-level theft." The final escalation was here. The charge was no longer civil. It was criminal. Rostova was not just seeking to free the Glyptons. She was seeking to dismantle an empire. She was going to use their own laws, their own records, and their own arrogance to bring their entire house of cards crashing down. The public ledger of the conclave, the silent witness to all their transactions, was about to become their book of judgment. The mirror was about to be turned upon them, and its reflection would be devastating. The reckoning was at hand. The information flooded the conclave's public data streams not as a wave, but as a change in the light. One moment, the Cathar Imperium's economic status was a pillar of golden stable code. The next, it was riddled with flickering red alerts of inquiry and contradiction. The audit packaged and signed by the authority of a conclave adjudicator was now part of the permanent public record. Every species, every faction, every curious observer with access to the ledger could see it. They could see the centuries of lies calculated down to the last stolen joule of energy. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. It was the sound of a paradigm breaking. On the bridge of the Vindication, the crew watched the data cascade. There was no cheering, no celebration. The scale of the crime was too vast, too cold. It was like discovering a fundamental law of physics was a lie. Anya Sharma's face was a mixture of triumph and horror. They didn't just skim, she whispered. They hollowed them out. Dozens of worlds for centuries. Kenji stood by Rostova's chair, his posture rigid. What will they do now, Commander? They can't argue the numbers. Rostova's gaze was fixed on the tactical display, where the Cathar warships still held their sullen, silent vigil. No, she said softly. They cannot argue the numbers. So they will try to change the subject. They will try to make this about blood. The universe now knew their name was not creditor, but thief. Ambassador Xthar Klee stood in the ruins of his strategy. The private chamber of his delegation felt like a tomb. His aides, lesser beings of chitin and ambition, scurried in the background, their usual arrogance replaced by a palpable fear. A direct channel to the Cathar Imperator was open the image of the ancient, wizened leader shimmering with rage. You were sent to secure a debt, the Imperator hissed, his voice like grinding stone. Instead, you have invited the galaxy to look at our receipts. Xthar Klee bowed low, his pride a shattered husk. Imperator, the humans' methods were unorthodox. They used our own transparency against us. Your failure is the unorthodoxy, the Imperator retorted. The threat was unspoken but absolute. Xthar Klee saw his future contracting to a single painful point. There was only one path left for him, one final desperate act to salvage something from this disaster. It would not win him the legal case, but it might save his life. Imperator, he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old cunning. The humans have proven we are not owed a debt of gratitude. Allow me to give the Glyptons and the Conclave a lesson on the price of ingratitude. A debt of pain is the last resort of a failed accountant. The Imperator's image was silent for a long moment. Then a slow, cruel approximation of a smile spread across his ancient face. Do it, he commanded, and the channel closed. Xthar Klee straightened up. He was no longer a diplomat. He was an executioner. He turned to his chief technical officer. Initiate the mandate of correction. On my mark. All callers. Maximum enforcement. He was going to burn the entire field rather than let the humans have the harvest. If he could not have their gratitude, he would have their agony. On Glypton, a family huddled around a public data terminal in a crowded market square. The air, recycled and clean for the first time in generations, without a tithe attached to its cost, felt different, lighter. The numbers from the human ship's audit were on the screen, a dizzying testament to the scale of the lie they had lived under. The Glypton elder, the one who had been displayed at the inquiry, was there. His collar had been removed upon his return, a hasty gesture of goodwill by the conclave marshals. He touched his bare neck, a gesture of disbelief and dawning wonder. "We are free," a young one whispered, her 4 hands clasped together. The elder looked not at the screen, but at the sky. "Freedom is not a gift," he said, his voice raspy. "It is a verdict, and we are still waiting for the sentence." They feared the Cathar's silence more than their demands. The alarm on the Vindication's bridge was a shrill, piercing cry. It was not a military alert. It was a data surge warning. Pallas's voice was sharp, stripped of its usual calm. "Commander, I am detecting a massive encrypted command signal originating from the Cathar delegation. It is targeting the Glypton system. The protocol matches the punitive functions the ambassador described for the gratitude callers." Anya's face went white. "They're triggering them. All of them." Kenji's hand slammed down on the tactical console. "Raise shields. Target their lead ship's command antenna. Let's end this." No Rostova's voice cut through the rising panic like a diamond blade. "Belay that order. Firing on them makes us criminals and them martyrs. We will not answer their crime with another one." Kenji stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. "Commander, they are about to torture millions of people as a final act of spite." Rostova's eyes were blazing with a cold, furious light. "Yes, they are. And we are going to stop them. Pallas, you have the full authority of the Conclave's audit charter. Does that give you network priority? There is no justice in becoming what you fight." The AI's response was instantaneous. "Affirmative, Commander. For the purposes of data verification, my access privileges temporarily supersede all non-emergency sovereign traffic." Rostova's plan snapped into place, a desperate, brilliant gambit in the face of raw cruelty. "Then use it. Don't block their signal, override it. Hijack their command protocol. Issue a system-wide deactivation code. Use their own weapon against them. Now, Pallas. Now." It was a duel fought at the speed of light, a battle of code and will with the lives of an entire species hanging in the balance. The main view screen split. On one side, the Cathar warships sat inert, broadcasting their invisible wave of pain. On the other, a torrent of data showed Pallas fighting its way through layers of Cathar encryption. Red error messages flared and died, pushed aside by the sheer processing power of the human AI, backed by the legal authority of the Conclave itself. It was like watching 2 gods wrestle with lightning. For a few agonizing seconds, the Cathar signal held priority. A faint collective cry of pain echoed in the real-time biometric data streaming from Glypton. Then Pallas broke through. A single clean line of green code sliced through the Cathar's red stream. "Command protocol overridden," the AI announced. "All gratitude callers are now inert. I have also issued a self-bricking command. They can never be reactivated." A tyrant's final command was an error message. On the bridge, the crew let out a collective, shuddering breath. They had just witnessed a new kind of war and a new kind of victory. Rostova stood, her knuckles white, where she gripped the arms of her chair. The cost of victory had just been paid. Millions of Glyptons had felt the first lash of the Cathar's spite. They were free, but they were scarred. That too would be added to the ledger. Kenji Rostova said, her voice dangerously calm. "Place the Cathar ambassador under arrest. Use the conclave marshals. Cite his direct and malicious violation of the inquiry's non-interference mandate. And Anya," she continued, turning to her legal officer, "it's time for the final session. I believe the ambassador has one last thing to contribute to the public record, a confession." The final inquiry session was not a trial. It was an autopsy. Extharcli was no longer a proud ambassador, but a prisoner stripped of his robes of light, his chitinous body seeming dull and lifeless under the neutral glow of the chamber. He was compelled to be there, a witness to the final dismantling of his empire's greatest lie. Rostova did not address the adjudicators. She addressed him directly, her voice amplified throughout the silent gallery. Ambassador Extharcli, you began this inquiry by speaking of a sacred obligation, a gratitude tax. You said your ledgers were immaculate. She paused. Our audit has shown a discrepancy of several trillion standardized credit units, an error of 17 orders of magnitude. Would you care to account for it? The truth has a weight that crushes arguments. Extharcli remained silent, his multifaceted eyes staring at nothing. Rostova continued, her voice relentless, each word a carefully placed stone on the scales of justice. You presented the gratitude collar as a tool of convenience and partnership, yet your final recorded act was to use it as a weapon of mass torture, a parting gift of pain to a people whose only crime was to be audited. Please, for the public ledger, explain this interpretation of gratitude. She let the question hang in the air, a final damning indictment. He had no answer. His silence was the confession she sought. He had been so proud of his system, so eager to explain its mechanics. Now faced with its true nature, he had nothing to say. He had been forced to see himself in the mirror she held up, and the reflection had broken him. She had made him speak his method, and then she had made him live its consequences. Rostova finally turned to the three silent adjudicators. The Cathar Imperium did not engage in a bad faith contract. They engaged in a predatory ideology. They believed that power confers the right to own, and that rescue confers the right to enslave. They have proven by their own records and their own actions that they are unfit to hold a creditor's position in this conclave. She did not ask for punishment. She did not ask for sanctions or war. She asked for something far more elegant, far more resonant. We do not ask for vengeance. We ask for balance. We ask for a mirror. She laid out the plan. It was simple, brutal, and perfectly poetically just. We ask the conclave to enforce a mirror ledger. The debt is real, but it is the Cathar who owe it. The exact amount calculated by the audit will be repaid to every species they have exploited. Their tithe system will be reversed. Their own technology, their own accounting methods will be used to garnish their output until the debt is paid in full. She let that sink in. A gratitude tax, after all, must be paid by those who have the most to be grateful for. And today, the Cathar should be grateful that the only thing we are taking back is what they stole. Justice is not an act of passion, but an act of accounting. The adjudicators did not need to confer for long. Their decision was a formality. The evidence was absolute. The crime self-confessed, the proposed remedy, an act of perfect legal symmetry. The lead adjudicator, a being of crystalline thought, spoke, its voice echoing in the chamber and across the conclave. The petition is granted. The mirror ledger is enacted, effective immediately. The doctrine of gratitude tithes is hereby declared an illegal instrument of systemic coercion and is struck from all recognized legal frameworks. Sovereignty. The adjudicator declared, its voice rising with the weight of historical precedent, may not be held as collateral against a debt of survival. The Cathar's entire economic and political model had been outlawed. The precedent was locked. Aboard the Vindication, Rostova watched the conclave's public ledger with Kenji at her side. The change was happening. The golden pillar of the Cathar's economic status flickered, then inverted. A new heading appeared, stark and unadorned: Debtor Collective. Billions of credit units began to flow out, rerouted by the Conclave's master network, streaming towards the accounts of the Glyptons and dozens of other wounded civilizations. "We made an enemy today," Kenji said quietly. "One that will last for 1,000 years." Rostova nodded her eyes, never leaving the screen. "Yes, we did. That is one cost of this victory." The other cost was the report she had just read. Though Pallas had been fast, thousands of Glyptons had suffered permanent neurological damage from the collar's spiteful discharge. Freedom had left a scar. The win was not clean. It was earned. The great mirror arrays, the vast orbital installations that had powered Pallas's audit, by reflecting and processing the light-speed data, began to dim. Their task was complete. Their polished surfaces, which for weeks had mirrored the financial soul of an empire, now reflected only the quiet, indifferent stars. Rostova stood alone, a solitary figure against the vastness of space. The universe did not trade in vengeance. It did not recognize anger or pride. It was a place of numbers of energy given and energy taken. Justice was not about settling scores. It was about balancing the books. The Cathar had built an empire on a rounding error, believing no one would ever check the math. They were wrong. A collar was not a contract. A rescue was not a receipt. And a debt, when paid in full, was not an end. It was a beginning. A universe that counts cannot be cheated.